at this point, you should have picked a snowflake and drawn that. And this is an example of a flower that we're going to draw together. So I am going to pull this to my new screen. We're going to start with our title block. I'm just going to switch this to the other screen so that way we can take any measurements as we draw. So I'm going to start the new drawing. I'm going to call this Flower 1. So this flower looks really complicated, but it's not. We're going to use that polar array. So we're really only creating 1/8 of our flower. So I'm going to move into my model space. I'm always going to start in my model space. And I'm going to start with a circle that is a radius of 0.4. I'm going to grab my circle and draw 0.4. Zoom in so that way it's a little bit easier to see. And that way, that's where I'm going to start. Concentric with the circle, I'm going to draw another circle with the same center point with a radius of 0.5. This is just to give me that outline so that way when I cut it out, I have specific things that are going to stay. So from here, I'm going to grab my polyline. So polyline creates a 2D line, and they're connected, but we can manipulate them as we go. So I'm going to start my polyline, and I'm going to start it at this top quadrant of my smaller circle, of my radius of 0.4 circle. So I'm going to start my polyline here. And notice right now it's a straight line, just like as if we were drawing a regular line. But I'm going to click A, enter, and that's going to allow me to create this kind of angled one. It doesn't really matter. I was hoping my curve would go to the other side, but that's okay. I'm going to bring this up here, and I'm going to find my same line. I may change my mind, but this is going to allow me to manipulate what this line looks like. So for this part, not everyone's is going to be identical because we're all creating our own petal shape. So my petal length is about 1. So I'm just going to manipulate this until I get the shape that I want. And I'm really only forming half of my petal because we're going to mirror it to form the other half. I think this is a little bit too wide. You can shorten it a little bit. So whatever you think looks good, you can unhighlight it. Notice this has a pretty severe dip, so I can just kind of slightly adjust that. So you're just going to create whatever it is that you want it to look like. I like that one. So now I'm going to actually mirror this now so that way I have that space that I'm working within. I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to grab it from my center point, from that quadrant. Oh, sorry. Read the commands as it goes. So when I moved that top point, I don't want to erase my source, so I'm going to say no. When I moved that top point, they didn't quite connect. So what I am going to do is I'm just going to draw in a quick line. I can delete it. And I'm going to make sure that that comes all the way over. So that way now, when I mirror this object, it's going to form a full petal. There we go. So there I have it. And now I'm going to offset this. So I'm going to offset this in. Offset. I'm going to set my distance as 0.0625. and I'm going to bring that in. So that way I have this space. So I can trim all of my extra lines, trim all of these, so that way I have what my petal is going to look like. Notice when we remove this from our total material, because there's no lines here, the laser's not going to cut it. That's going to be one solid object so far. So now I'm going to create those kind of points in the insides of my petals. So I'm going to draw a line. We can go up 0.75. If we don't like that, we can always adjust it. And then I'm going to come over. And part of this is going to be really up to you. But I'm just going to take this spike because I want them to be symmetrical, and I'm going to mirror it. So for this, I don't really need this inside part anymore. I'll take all this, delete it, and notice if we take all these, there's that kind of spike that we had in our original one. You may want to keep your center line so that way you have something to connect to for your small spikes. So I'm just going to come out and create those kind of small points. Again, this is another one. Yours is not going to be exactly the same as mine because it's based on what you want yours to look like. I think I actually want mine to come up a little higher. Like that. This, I'm going to trim all the excess. I find I like to trim and make as many modifications as possible prior to mirroring, so that way there's not quite as much later on. So notice mine is not exactly lined up, that's okay. There we go. No, I don't want to erase it, and then I just have to trim these short parts. Oh, notice I didn't click exactly. If it's not trimming exactly what you want, all I'm doing is I'm extending it so that way it touches. Trim these, and there is my initial petal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this. We're going to choose polar array. Our center point is the center of our circle, and we're going to choose 8 of them. Close array. Now, notice that these all select as one object. I'm going to choose explode, and I'm going to select that array. Now, I can manipulate these individually. Before I get too far, I am going to trim this bottom part of the petal so that way it stays connected when I laser them. So there's a good first part of our flower. Next I'm going to choose my circle, and I want to use a tangent radius, so I could just do TTR if I've already selected my circle tool, and I'm going to say that I want it to be tangent to this line with a radius of 0.125. And that's going to draw in this circle. Now remember, the placement of this is going to be a little bit different depending on the shape of your petal. I'm going to offset this that same 0.0625, and I'm just going to offset my circle. So here I'm going to trim a little bit just so you can see what we're creating. So it's going to connect to our petals. So notice now from this whole part, I'm coming up. All of this is one inside part, which is what we want. Okay, So now we're going to create the kind of top part of this circle. So I'm just going to use my polyline. Again, I'm going to create it how I want. This is where it's going to look a little bit different for everybody. So I'm going to choose where these intersect. I'm going to say that I want it to be an arc, enter, and I'm just going to kind of create these two circles. Let's actually draw a line so we know where we want them to go to. Take this, we can extend that. So that way we know where we want it to go. Sorry, I backtracked a minute. So what I am going to do so that way I know where I want that point to go to is I'm going to use my XL. I'm going to use my XL line tool, XL, and instead of selecting vertical, horizontal, angle, I'm going to just select my XL line to go through this center point and through that center point. So that way I can make sure it stays symmetrical. So now I'm going to choose my polyline. I'm going to start it where this intersects, enter, and I'm just going to kind of create some curves, and that looks pretty good. I like it a little bit. I might bring this out a little bit further. And again, I'm going to create this to look however I want it to. This looks a little too long compared to what I'm looking for. So this part again is totally up to you. You're going to create this shape using your polylines. It's not going to be the same as mine or anybody else's. So I'm going to take this, I'm also going to offset it, that same 0.65, and I'm going to bring that in. So from here, I'm going to select these and mirror them. We'll have a little bit of trimming to do, but that's okay. I don't want to erase that. I can delete extra, and I'm going to trim. Creating these kind of repeating designs using different lines and points is really important. We're going to trim quite a bit. I'm going to trim that. I'm going to do the same line over here. So now we have a pretty good start to our shape. So let's trim these points. I want to create those last kind of two loops on this side. I did erase my XL line. You don't have to erase that yet. I'm going to actually add it back in right now, so I still have that nice mirror line. There we go. Polyline. I'm going to start it somewhere on this petal, towards the bottom. You can start it right from the point. I'm going to start it a little bit higher. Enter. I'm just going to create kind of my own shape, and I'm going to connect that to this top of the petal. That got a little really large, but that's okay. I'm just going to manipulate that so that way it does what I want it to. So it's okay if those points don't go exactly where you want them to go. We can move the starting point and end point. We just want to make sure that's on the line. I kind of like that. Offset this, we're going to bring it in. Obviously it doesn't go far enough, so I'm going to extend this so that way it does. Choose this and mirror. And then I'm going to trim. Notice that line didn't quite connect. That's okay, but what I am going to do, I'm going to make sure I extend it. I could be typing these tools as well. Does not matter whether you're typing it in or clicking on it. So there's a good start. I'm going to add in a spike like this one. We can add in a few. I'm going to start with just one. I keep deleting that XL, X line, even though I find I do want it. But that's okay if you just keep adding it back in, or if you've kept it. So what that's going to allow me to do is I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to bring that out wherever I want it to go. Mirror that. If you select the right point to start your mirror line, it makes it much easier. So there's that addition to my flower. So I'm going to select all of this that I just drew. Notice I have these 3 lines already in between my other petals. So I'm going to take this polar array, and I'm going to make sure I have 8 of them. And that looks pretty good. Close array. So there's a pretty good start to it. I might actually add to this, just because I think it's fun. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to come up at an angle, and I'm just going to create a triangle. If you want to round the corners of your triangle, you can do that. I'm just going to leave mine really simple. I want to erase that. I'm going to delete this. I just think this adds a little detail in this center part. Polar array. And I'm going to put 8 of them, just because I have 8 petals. The other parts, and I can close that. Now, the size I make those, I could put another circle in the middle. The size I make these, that's totally up to you. Let's do that. I really like how this looks. I do have a little bit of trimming. Notice, see how this is cut here, and it's not over here. If there's no gap there, the laser's going to cut that, and there's going to be nothing to hold this on. So I'm just going to explode, and I'm just going to choose the whole thing, just so that way I know I have multiple polar arrays. So that way, all I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in, and I'm going to trim anything that needs to be trimmed. You can decide. So notice I left these lines on my original one. If you want to trim those, you can. If you want it to cut down that kind of part of a line and you're just leaving the gap over here, that's up to you. So if you want to come in and just trim these parts near the circle, you can do that. But you do need to make sure there is no line here, because if that line is there, the laser is going to cut that, and then there's going to be nothing holding it on. So notice this shape has a solid line. So this shape here is going to be removed totally from the material. It will not stay. It's not going to be attached in any way. So we're going to go through, just finish trimming, make sure everything looks the way you want it to. Again, yours is going to look very similar, but your polar or your poly lines are not going to be identical to mine, and that's okay. So you're just going to make sure you come through and trim them. Good luck creating your flower.